"What are we gonna do?" Abby asked after an awkward silence. "I wish I knew," I replied. "Right now I am hurt, humiliated, and angry. Any suggestions on how I can get rid of the big three?" "All I can do is apologize," Abby said, shaking slightly. "I made a huge mistake. Please, please forgive me. I do not want to lose you." "Abby, it's not that simple," I said, leaning back and crossing my arms over my chest. "The whole world looks at me like I'm a cuckold. My wife cheated on me and I didn't do anything about it." Abby cried. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was so excited to meet Brad Talbot and see his home. I knew you'd be a little annoyed with me, but I never thought it would turn out to be such a mess. Abby, I want you to know that I sincerely hope that we can find a way through this," I said, and her face brightened for a moment. "But I also want you to know that I have consulted with an attorney. If this turns into a divorce, I want you to know that I will seek full custody of the girls. I think you should hire your own lawyer." "I don't want a divorce," she cried. "And I won't let you take my girls from me." "Abby, I'm not saying we'll get divorced, but I think we need to think about the worst-case scenario. And I'm not trying to hurt you," I lied. "But I think you need to keep in mind that with your recent notoriety, the court may look very favorably on my petition for custody. Please don't do this," Abby begged. "I will do everything so that we can be together again." "Why don't we just continue talking?" I suggested. "In fact, why don't we have lunch next Sunday when you hand the girls over to me?" "Suppose I decide to keep the girls with me," she said, with a flash of anger in her voice. "I don't like passing them back and forth. I don't think it's good for them. If you do this, then I will have no choice but to begin divorce proceedings immediately. And remember, it was you who tarnished your name. I believe that the court will not look favorably on an adulteress as a mother of impressionable girls." At that moment, all the fight drained out of Abby. "I will not do it. I don't want a divorce." At the beginning of the second week, I returned to my office. My assistants were very sympathetic to this. Some of my clients, not so many, two in particular, thought it was really funny and started making fun of me. I politely asked them to drop the topic, but they continued to tease me. I've had enough. I told them I was ending our relationship and transferring their portfolios to another office. Even though they both tried to apologize, I told them that our relationship was over. Word got back to my clients and there was no more talk about my wife and Brad. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Rita called me. "Do you have plans for tonight?" she asked. When I made it clear that no, she said, "Good, because you're having dinner with me at the Zoom Zoom restaurant at 7, tie and jacket required." Then she hung up. I was a little surprised when Rita told me she had a reservation at Zoom Zoom. This is the most exclusive restaurant in the city. It usually takes a year to book and is incredibly expensive. I arrived at 7 and was directed to a private room at the back of the restaurant. There was only a table for two, but the room was quite luxuriously furnished. There was even a velvet couch. Scenes of possible activity that took place on this piece of furniture flashed through my mind. About 5 minutes later, the door opened and I saw Rita Summers enter. When I jumped to my feet, I realized that she was literally taking my breath away. I had no doubt that the restaurant would have come to a complete stop when Rita entered. I figured she was about 5'4" or so. She had long blonde hair, soft brown eyes, and a figure that drove you crazy. But it was her smile that attracted you. For the life of me, I couldn't imagine why Brad would cheat on a woman like that. "Can I call you John?" she asked, sitting down opposite me. I nodded and asked, "How should I contact you?" "Rita, of course." This gentle giggle made me smile. We ordered drinks and sat for a while talking. I told Rita a little about my job, but mostly I told her funny stories about my girls or me when I was an awkward teenager. The waiter then returned and took our order. I didn't want to pressure Rita, but I was eager to find out what her plan was. I didn't mind saving my marriage, but I had no idea how to do it. When we finished eating, she leaned back in her chair. "First of all, John," Rita said with a sad smile, "that sneaky snake, Chad Tompkins, organized this whole mess. He fancies himself a film agent. But in reality, he is nothing more than a pimp. He sets up gullible men and women to be taken advantage of by movie stars. You wouldn't believe how many people, especially married women, get into bed with movie stars with Chad's help. You're talking to someone who knows this firsthand, I said with a growl. However, I didn't know what exactly Chad's job was. At least I was able to beat him up. Really? Rita's eyes sparkled. It's good news. But you really shouldn't be too harsh on your wife. I believe Brad could charm Mother Teresa by removing her panties. As you already know, your wife is not the first married woman to fall under his spell, but I intend to make her the last. And if I can't do that, then what I'm offering will at least repay him and your wife for the pain they caused us. I cannot promise that once my plan is completed, either of us will still be with our loved ones. However, despite this, we will feel the satisfaction of having avenged their betrayal and lies. I was somewhat taken aback by Rita's willingness to cut my wife some slack, but I was very happy to hear that there would be some kind of payback. Now I just wanted her to tell me how we were going to do it. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Before I get into the details, I just want to say that you are an extremely handsome man. And you are also very charming. I think your wife was a fool for jeopardizing your marriage. If we met under different circumstances, I would be very interested in dating you. That's very kind of you. But we both know that we are traveling in completely different worlds. And you are not just stunning, but even more than that, you are incredibly beautiful. You are very kind. You're right about our two different worlds, of course, but that doesn't change the fact that I find you very attractive. Thank you, was all I could think of to say, because I wanted to know the plan. So what are we going to do next? Within the next 2 weeks, I intend to become your client. I'm sorry, I do not understand. Client? Yes, you do offer financial advice to your clients, don't you? Rita said with a grin. Yes, sure. I still didn't understand where she was going with this. Then I intend to invest some money, she said simply. However, we will have to have 3 or 4 meetings to discuss the agreements. I think 4 would be the ideal number. 2 of these meetings will take place in your office, and 2 will be lunch meetings. I'll choose the seats myself. Okay, I said, still not sure why I was going to do this. I can open an account, but you have to invest at least $10,000. Oh, I intend to invest much more than that, she said, smiling wider. In the meantime, you won't tell your wife that I'm your client. You will continue to meet with her and discuss reconciliation. In 2 weeks, you will let her move home, but you will not sleep with her. On the 15th of October, you and your wife will be attending a gala evening, which is of decisive importance. This will be an evening for the charity that I helped found and have been working with for 5 years. Most people don't associate charity with me, and I like that. I attend charity events every 2 years. I wouldn't have attended this year because I was at the last gala. However, I will be there and you and your wife will be there too. Okay, I'll be with you at the charity gala. I know for sure that tickets to this event cost $20,000 each. I can't justify spending that kind of money. Rita giggled again, then smiled. The tingling sensation went from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. Your tickets will be free. You just tell your wife that a client gave them to you. I still don't understand how this achieves anything. I was now starting to get upset. Well, you see, John, part of the night's entertainment is the escort auction. Escort auction? Not that kind of escort, she giggled again. We sell willing men at auction to the women present. The woman or man who will pay the most for a particular person will put a sort of slave collar on him. Then the men are at the mercy of the women who paid for them, Rita said with a laugh before continuing. Most of them are bachelors, but married men expose themselves so that their wives can bid on them. Sometimes a married man is bought by someone other than his wife. I assume these married men are on their best behavior because otherwise their wives would cut off their genitals. However, at this year's gala, one married man will be auctioned off, and his wife will not win the bid. And what happens after will not be innocent. There was still a look of confusion on my face. Rita laughed and patted my hand. "You are a married man who will be put up for auction, and I'm the one who will have the winning bid. So you just need to rent a tuxedo, buy your wife a new dress, and be my guest." It suddenly dawned on me what Rita had planned, and it was brilliant. Both Brad and Abby were going to feel what it was like for us. Of course, I knew it was all for show, but just spending the night with Rita Summers while everyone assumed the worst might happen would go a long way toward balancing the scales. That would take the cuckold horns off me and put them on Brad. Besides, my wife would feel the same pain and humiliation that I did. Then maybe we could meet with a counselor and put this all behind us. The next few weeks flew by very quickly. I have to say that the first time Rita walked into my office, I thought all the girls there were going to pee their pants. Our lunch meetings took place in very private restaurants. I didn't understand why we held these meetings in secret. Everything important could be discussed in my office. Most of the time, we just told each other stories. These were fun lunches, and I learned a lot about Rita and Brad. She really loved him, and she would be devastated if they broke up, but she was willing to leave him if he was going to continue his old behavior. A week before the gala, I allowed Abby to come home. However, I told her that I would sleep in the guest room. She was in pain, but she did not insist. The Wednesday before the gala, I came home with the tickets and Abby's eyes lit up. She started ranting about all the celebrities that would be there. Then she scolded me for spending that amount of money. "It didn't cost me anything," I told her. "One of my clients asked me if I could use the tickets. I thought it would be a fun evening. By the way, I think you should buy a new dress. Buy something sexy." Abby was floating in the clouds. I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered that evening when I thought it would be a magical night for the two of us, only to look like a fool. It's time for her to feel my pain. When we arrived, we found that there were already about 500 people there. When we checked in, there was a table where you could sign up for the auction. I saw a line of men filling out forms. There were 5 really handsome men in line. So I turned to Abby. "What do you say, Abby?" I asked innocently, pointing to the table. "This is a charity and we didn't pay anything for the tickets. What do you say if I sign up and you can bid on me?" Abby giggled, but it wasn't nearly as musical as Rita's. "I don't have any money, and I didn't even take my wallet with me because it wouldn't fit in this bag." As per Rita's suggestion, I had cash with me. "Here's $1,000. I doubt you'll have to pay more than 50, but it's a charity, so offer at least 200. "You're worth $1,000 and much, much more," Abby said with a wide smile. I stood in line, and when I got to the registration table, I filled out the form and signed it. I looked at the list, and there were about 18 or 20 guys signed up. If I didn't know it was a setup, I would never have had the courage to do it. Just as I was about to turn away, the woman behind the counter asked, "Are you married?" I nodded, and she pulled out another form. "I hope your wife is with you, otherwise you won't be able to take part. She needs to fill out this form and sign it." I called Abby over and explained what they wanted. She quickly filled out the form. What Abby didn't realize, because she didn't read the form, was that she agreed to let me do whatever the winning bidder asked. After the paperwork was completed, we went in search of our table. Rita seated us at a table with 2 starlets, 1 TV presenter, and 2 actors in a national soap opera. My wife had stars in her eyes, not only from the people at our table, but also from the other celebrities at the gala. When the auction began, all the men who offered themselves were called. I smiled at my wife and stood up. As it turned out, there were 24 participants, and I'm sure that it was Rita's intention that they left me for last. By the time I was the last one on stage, they had already raised over $300,000, and I have to admit that the bidding was lively and fun. "Our last contestant is a local," said the announcer, a well-known game show host. "His name is John Sawyer, and he is married with 2 children. I'm sure his wife is emptying out her piggy bank somewhere in there. So what do you say if we start the bidding at $50? "I think it's worth at least $100, shouted an elderly woman in front. "Can you wash dishes, honey?" I laughed and shouted back, "I can wash and dry." This caused loud laughter from the crowd. "This is more than my husband can do," exclaimed another elderly woman. "I'll give you 200. Then it became 500. Finally, I heard Abby shout, "I'll give you $1,000. This caused everyone to rejoice. But almost immediately, a younger woman offered $2,000. Before I knew it, the bid had risen to $5,000. I looked at Abby and she was looking around, completely confused. I just shrugged, looking at her. An offer of $10,000 came from the back of the room. This was quickly followed by another for $15,000. If I hadn't known that it was all a setup, I might have gotten a headache. The bid reached $25,000 and I began to get a little nervous. I thought a few $1,000s would seal the deal. It was much more than I expected. Finally, from the far end of the room, I heard Rita's voice. "I bet $100,000. There was a stunned silence, not only because of the amount, but also because of who had placed the bet. Rita Summers walked down to just below the stage as the crowd roared. She smiled at me. She turned to the crowd and said, "And I don't even care if he knows how to wash dishes." Roars and cheers were heard again in the room. I must admit that I blushed a lot. Rita came up, put a traditional collar around my neck, and kissed me tenderly on the lips. From the stage, by prior arrangement, we returned to where Abby was sitting. She was stunned. She didn't know what to do or say. So I shrugged and said, "Well, I didn't plan this, Abby, but don't worry. It probably won't happen. Here are the car keys. As far as I understand the rules, I am Miss Summers's thing for the next 12 hours, maybe longer. See you at home tomorrow." Rita and I danced several dances at the gala evening. During these dances, she kept biting my ear. I saw Abby watching us with that deer-in-the-headlights look. When Rita took my arm and, pressing her chest against me, walked out of the ballroom with me, I saw Abby's lips tremble. After the gala, Rita took me in a limousine to another nightclub. We danced and talked there for an hour. After that, we went to a private screening of the new film. There was no one in the theater except Hollywood A-list people. The movie, I thought, was crap. Rita thought so too, but when we talked to the director, we were both delighted with him. The limousine then took us to a very seedy part of town. After the car was parked, I noticed that there were 2 cars parked behind us. Rita explained that they were part of her security team. She pointed to 2 dilapidated houses on opposite sides of the street. The one with the porch light still on was once my home. Brad lived in the house across the street. It wasn't such a bad area back then, but it was still pretty seedy. It was already about 3 o'clock in the morning when we finally reached Rita's apartment. She explained that she has 6 apartments, 1 in Hollywood, 1 in New York, 1 in Florida, 2 in Europe, and 1 in South America. This particular apartment was 3 stories tall and could fit 2 regular-sized houses. We entered the office and Rita poured me a drink. Sitting on the sofa, I started laughing. It's a pity that I didn't have a camera to take a picture of Abby. I almost feel guilty for doing this, but not really. Rita sat very close to me and put her hand on my knee. "John, tell me honestly, did your wife convince you that nothing happened?" "None of us will ever be able to prove it, but I believe they had sex," I said sadly. "That's why it still hurts so much. I know John, and I'm 99.9% sure that Brad had sex with your wife." Rita got angry at the thought. "I think this twist is fair game." With these words, Rita leaned over and kissed me tenderly. I was taken aback by this offer. I just assumed that we would go to Rita's house and sleep in separate rooms. Everyone would believe that we slept together, but we would know the truth. Now she was offering herself to me. It didn't take me long to make a decision. I suppose if I were a better person, I would refuse. But I was still hurt by what my wife did. Plus, who in their right mind would turn down the chance to sleep with Rita Summers? We kissed on the couch for about 20 minutes. It was intoxicating to be so close to such an incredibly beautiful woman. Finally, she took my hand and led me to her bedroom. Once inside, Rita began a slow striptease. It was hard from the first kiss. Watching Rita shed her clothes, I felt like I could lose my load right now. As Rita pulled off her panties, she pushed me onto her bed and pulled out my manhood. Abby was great at giving caresses to my male instrument, but I thought Rita was better. Or maybe things were just completely different. At that moment, I didn't care. When I was ready to explode, I told Rita. "I want you to do this," she said, breathless. "You're so delicious." It was all I could take and I exploded. I kissed Rita's breasts and caressed them. She reached her first climax. I ran my tongue over her belly and began to give her caresses with redoubled zeal. I knew where Abby's special place was, and I wondered if Rita had the same. So it was, and she again came to the finish line. "I want you to take me," Rita said with fierce insistence. "Don't worry, I'm clean and I'm on birth control pills." By this time, Rita was ready, and I carefully slid inside. I was in heaven. I continued to increase the pressure more and more until Rita screamed and reached climax. After a few seconds, I followed her. I couldn't believe how big my explosion was. We made love twice more before we fell asleep in each other's arms. I woke up the next morning with Rita working on my manhood. I wish Abby would do something like that to me. I would love to wake up like this sometimes. After Rita brought me to the finish line, we made love again. Then I looked at my watch and realized that it was almost 11 o'clock. I should have been home by now. Rita laughed at my crazy expression. "Remember, your wife didn't worry when you were waiting for her at home. And remember, nothing happened." I laughed, and we took a shower together. After drying off and getting dressed, Rita prepared eggs for me while she waited for the limousine to come pick me up. On the way home, I finally found peace. If Abby had wanted to, I felt like we could now work on putting everything behind us. When I walked into our house, I found Abby crying in the living room. "I wasn't sure you'd come home," she said miserably. "The news is abuzz that Rita Summers paid $100,000 to spend a night with you. At first I thought it was just payback, but then I saw the way she looked at you. If she spent that much, she must really care about you. But I don't blame you for what you did. Do we have any future?" "First of all, Abby," I lied, "nothing happened." She looked at me almost with anger in her eyes, but then it disappeared. "Really?" "Rita is my new client," I told my wife. She felt it was fair considering what Brad did to me. Besides, Rita is the one who gave me the tickets. She typically makes anonymous donations of $100,000 each year. This year, Rita made it public to send a message to her fiancé. So you're right, it was to repay Brad. Whether we have a future or not is entirely up to you. If you're ready to work on our marriage and go to counseling, I'm ready too. Abby ran into my arms and I kissed her deeply. Then I took her to our bedroom. I don't know where I found the strength, but we made love twice. I then went back to sleep until my two girls pounced on me around 2 p.m. We had a quiet dinner with the girls, and after they went to bed, Abby and I sat on our patio holding hands. I knew then that we could put the pieces of our marriage back together. Abby and I found a good counselor, Wendy, and she was very helpful in solving our problems. Surprisingly, Wendy was much stricter towards Abby. I assumed that since she was a woman, she would be more sympathetic to my wife. But she pointed out that Abby was planning to take time away from our marriage, while I wasn't planning on it. Even though we both insisted that nothing happened, I don't think Wendy believed either of us. Despite this, she said that the simple fact that we chose to leave our spouses with someone was a betrayal. Abby blushed deeply at most of it. Of course, Wendy gave me a pass of sorts because she basically saw my night as Rita's revenge on her fiancé. This was true, of course. But what Wendy didn't know was that I was up to my neck in planning and executing it. However, the sessions were very useful. There is one side effect to all this fuss. Abby doesn't like going to the movies anymore. She doesn't even like to watch movies on TV. However, she will go with the girls if they want to go to any children's movie. As for Chad and Thelma, I have dropped the charges against Thelma. I told the authorities that she thought she was protecting her husband. But I allowed the accusations to be made against Chad. He received 3 months in the county detention center. Chad and Thelma were kicked out of our group and Abby no longer speaks to Thelma. They had a big fight because Abby blames Thelma for almost ruining our marriage. I won't say that. I understand my wife's logic. Rita and Brad got married in the so-called wedding of the century. There were more than 1,000 guests there. If you weren't invited, you were nobody in Hollywood. In case you were wondering, Abby and I didn't receive an invitation. However, I did send Brad a wedding gift. I bought a pair of bull horns and sent them to him with a note that read, "You leave my wife alone, and I will leave yours alone." I was still mad at Brad when I sent the antlers, but Rita told me that Brad thought the gift was hilarious. He hung them in his office with a framed note underneath. However, since Hollywood is Hollywood, the marriage lasted barely a year. True to her word, when Rita discovered that Brad was again chasing married women, she divorced him. It was friendly, and they are still friends. It's a shame because I know Rita loved him deeply. From what she told me about their relationship over the years, I know that they truly had a connection that was much deeper than most couples. But obviously this was not enough. And yes, Rita is still my client. When we opened her account, she deposited $1 million. I fully expected her to close the account as soon as her planned revenge was completed. But Rita left it with me. When the amount grew to $1.5 million, she contributed another $2 million. I haven't seen her in person since the day after the gala, but I talk to her at least 4 times a year to discuss her investments. Sometimes she calls with a question about her account, but sometimes she calls just to talk. I enjoy these conversations the most. Rita is a very savvy businesswoman. Surprisingly, she is also quite conservative, at least in her investments. I have no idea what her policy is. Even when I update Rita's portfolio quarterly, we go through her account in about 20 minutes and then spend the next hour or two talking about our lives. After Rita divorced Brad, she told me that she should have left me and left Brad. I laughed and reminded her that we lived in 2 different worlds. Since then, Rita has been teasing me about keeping an eye on me, and it's her supposed plan that if the stars ever line up so that I'm lonely and she decides to quit playing, she'll do whatever it takes to get me. I know she's just joking, but it's a good fantasy that I keep in the back of my mind. Abby and I are approaching our 10th wedding anniversary. We've had a few rough patches, but overall it's been a great marriage so far. Looking back, I am convinced that if Rita had not come to my rescue, I would have divorced Abby. And today, I cannot imagine what life would be like without her. Oh yes, and one last thing. Abby is pregnant, and we are having a little boy. I can hardly wait for this. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.